Hello everybody, I am in fact back with State of the Division, and this time UFC 280 is right around the corner and I'm actually excited to see what happens. I think the early prelims show a bit of potential for new fighters coming in and some fighters trying to find their way back into contention, and when you get to the main card, I feel like it's contenders from top to bottom. You have guys coming off failed title fights, you have guys looking for title fights, and if the UFC has its way, O'Malley will be fighting for the title soon. But starting us off is the ever popular early prelims, or the prelims, because I don't know how the UFC lists this stuff anymore. 10-6, Lena Elbow Queen Landsberg, winning the worst ring name already on this card, takes on the 15-4 Carol Rosa. Rosa is only 13 years younger, and depending on whether or not you trust Sherdog or the UFC stats, she's 2 inches shorter, does take 2 inches in reach no matter what though. That'll be a running theme with this fight. Now, Landsberg is an odd mix to look at. Striking is rather poor. She's a 2.74 landed to a 3.8 unabsorbed, and she's only outstruck her opponent in 3 of her 9 UFC fights. Oftentimes, the striking isn't even all that close. In her last 2 alone, she was outstruck 1-38 and 39-78. As you can guess, that makes her more of the grinder type of fighter, get to decisions and get those. But her takedown percentage isn't that good either, only a .62 average across her fights. And while it seems like she can play from her back, she's yet to win a UFC fight without a takedown in that fight. Now, Rosa, as mentioned, is 13 years younger, which does give her a bit of an edge. But she's also more of a striker, 6.65 landed to 4.45 absorbed. She has yet to be a finisher in the UFC, 0 in, 6 outside, but she can pour it on when needed. She outstruck Beth Correa 125-62 and Jocelyn Edwards 57-38. She also has been able to see her takedowns to relative success, but from looking at her stats and how she fights, it ain't a regular part of her game, so I'm not going to comment much on it. Rosa is the favorite here, and I'm going to agree. This fight, I think, is closer than it will. Landsberg has shown the chin and the ability to hang in there, so I don't know if Rosa, who hasn't gotten a finish, will be able to finish her. So I imagine this goes the distance, and it could be close because split decisions can happen whenever. But Rosa's ability to pour the striking on, the 13-year age advantage, and her greater success on takedowns compared to Landsberg makes me lean in her direction. Maybe Landsberg can turn it around this fight, but just based on what I've read and what I've seen, I'm going to lean Rosa. 8-0-0-1, Mohamed Punisher Mokaev looks to keep his O against 14-5, Malcolm X Gordon. And no, I'm not joking, that is in fact his ring name. Mokaev is 10 years younger, and once again, maybe 2 inches taller, but UFC and Sherdog list him as 2 different heights, but 1 inch reach and 1 inch reach does in fact go to Gordon. Now, Mokaev has only fought twice in the UFC, but I feel comfortable saying he really likes the ground game, considering his takedown average is 11.27. And I'm not joking, he had 12 takedowns against Charles Johnson. Based on his background, he very much strikes me as a ground-heavy fighter who pummels you there or just grinds you into oblivion. Again, not much there, 2 fights in the UFC. Gordon, on the other hand, is another weird fighter already on this card. 2-2 in the UFC, 1 submission and KO loss, 1 decision and 1 KO win. Outside the UFC, he does in fact have 6 submission wins and 5 KO wins. And despite the 2.06 takedown average, it seems to be relatively ineffective in the UFC so far. His stat spread is so odd that I'm hard to get a feel for how his game works. Where I don't want to label him a finisher, but it seems like that's how he leans in fighting a high-risk, high-reward fight. With that 1 decision win, I don't know how really to take it, if you understand what I'm saying. The heavy favorite is Mokaev, and for the sake of being boring, I'm going to agree. This is a hard fight to judge me, but he's had so few, and considering how heavy he goes for takedowns, I don't think looks like Gordon won't be able to defend all of these takedowns, and considering he hasn't defended them well, I don't imagine it goes well for him in this fight. Now, what I'm pretty sure is a late addition, 7-2 Arman Superman Petrosian, said that wrong, looks to rebound. It consists 6-1-0-1. That is the weirdest stats. That's the weirdest win-loss spread I've seen in a while. AJ Dobson. Petrosian is 1 year older, and according to UFC, 2 inches taller, but according to Sherdog, he's 6'2", which is the exact same as Dobson. I don't know. Either way, Dobson has a 5 inches in reach. Petrosian is a striker through and through, though. And based on his stats, and the fact he has 6 KO wins, in the UFC he's been running with a 5.17 landed and a 2.26 absorbed. Knockout power showed up in his Contender Series fight and could be a threat here. It's always a toss-up when it comes to these fights coming off a Contender Series and coming into the UFC. I will say a big weakness of his seems to be takedowns. It looks like he can survive the ground. With a takedown defense of 30%, it ain't great of him avoiding going there. Now, Dobson's also relatively new, leans a bit heavier towards being a finisher. 3 KO wins, 2 submission wins, and 1 decision win. I can't judge his stats too much given he has one actual fight and a Contender Series win, but it looks like a mixed game where threats can come from anywhere, but they're not the threat. I don't know how much of a threat they are to finish somebody as often as he would like. This is again what's really hard with the guys who have so few UFC fights, is that you have two talent comparisons. Unless I recognize one of the names, it's hard for me to say I like this. But Vegas again likes Petrosyan, and I'm going to agree once again. It's nothing against Dobson, but Petrosyan has looked slightly better stat-wise, and that's all I really have. With so few fights, this could go either way. Petrosyan's stats look slightly better. I tend to like him a bit more here. But now we have a battle of last names I won't be able to pronounce. 16, 3-1. Abubakar Nurmagomedov looks to build a streak against the 13-1 Gadzi Omargahadziev, with Gadzi being 3 years younger, 2 inches taller, but does give up an inch in reach. Now, Nurmagomedov here has only fought twice in the UFC, going 1-1. From what I can gather outside the UFC, he leans into that striking and grinding, 6 KO and 6 decision wins entirely. Takedowns seem to be part of his repertoire, but going 1 for 5 in a win doesn't seem all that great. I get it's pressure and stuff, but you tend to want to succeed on more than one. Godzi's a little of the same, 1-1 UFC, what seems to be ability to throw takedowns. However, he is much more of a finishing-based striker, 8 KO wins outside the UFC and 1 submission win in the UFC. Bit more of a finisher in that regard, which this does stack up to be at least interesting on paper. Shockingly, Nurmagomedov is the favorite here, and I'm going to agree. Once again, there's absolutely no real UFC data here. From what I got, Nurmagomedov takedown game looks decent, and that's something that Omargahadze looks to struggle against someone else on this card, Kyle Boriahalo, which I said wrong. We're moving on to a fight that actually could be kind of interesting. Mustafayev versus Nishikawa, and look at that, it's canceled. So what's actually interesting here is that this was in fact a short notice fight for Nishikawa, who is 19 years old. I have issues putting a 19-year-old against a 34-year-old. I'm also confused how you fight in an organization that lets you get 6 draws. That being said, apparently the issue is that while Nishikawa, I don't know if he agreed to do the fight or was signed to do the fight, but he is in fact under contract with what I assume to be a Japanese-based promotion. That means that he cannot then leave that contract to go fight in the UFC promotion, leaving Mustafayev, who this was already a short-term opponent change for him, without an opponent, likely meaning this fight is scrapped. However, I do have one thing I want to comment on. Why in God's name was that not something that was decently well known? It was either held by Nishikawa, who didn't tell when he was contacted by the UFC, or the UFC assumed he was a free agent and could get out of his contract. Either way, someone did something wrong here, and it's kind of interesting to see how bumbled this entire thing was. Moving on to an actual fight, though. 20-5, Zubaira Warrior Takagov, looks to get some sort of consistency back against the 14-1 Lucas Almeida. Almeida does take 3 inches in height and reach, and nothing else noticeable here. Takagov is another weird fighter on this card. If you notice, that's a consistent thing here. He's a grinder through and through, however. I will say that much. He has 12 decision wins, and the UFC stats backing up that grinding thing. Dead even striking and a 2.46 takedown average across his UFC fights. It does seem like that's something that can be reversed. His fight with Riron Murphy, he had 6 takedowns for 15 seconds. Murphy had 0 for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Now, Almeida's only got 1 UFC fight and looks to be a fairly aggressive kill-or-be-killed fighter. Total of 9 KO and 5 submission wins. Now, with all that information, Vegas likes Takagov, and I can see why, but I have a gut feeling here. And I'm going to regret this, but I'm going to go with Almeida. I'm not incredibly confident in this choice, but the high-octane kill-or-be-killed seems to be good against what looks to be a slower-paced fighter in Takagov. That grinding style works a lot of the time, but against kill-or-be-killed guys, you can see it get flipped pretty easily. And while I think Almeida might be able, I don't know the full extent of his ground game, seeing it flipped by Riron Murphy gives me some hope that Almeida can flip it or get a submission off that Takagov won't be able to prevent. But light heavyweights are up, and I'm excited for these guys. Volkan No Time Ozdemir looks to get a streak back against Nikita the Miner Krylov. Krylov is 3 years younger and either an inch or two taller, with a definite 2 inches in reach. Sherdog and UFC don't agree. Ozdemir has got a standard array of light heavyweight stats. He's got close landed to absorb, 476, 399, and slight situational takedown game, .40. But Ozdemir has proven the ability to go the distance in this fight, pouring on strikes to build comfortable leads, and even shooting takedowns to gain an advantage or recover. He's very much kind of, not the benchmark for light heavyweight, but I were to say, describe to me your average light heavyweight fighter. Let me rephrase that, successful light heavyweight fighter. I feel like you'd end up with a rough drawing of Volkan Ozdemir. The kind of guy that has a solid striking game, has some power, and then has the situational takedown game, the ability to wrestle. It's kind of what you end up with a light heavyweight. On that note, Krylov is extremely similar. He has proven to be a bit more of an early finisher compared to Ozdemir. Ozdemir kind of, I believe the best way to describe it is kind of drags his opponents more into the pool before he finishes them off. However, his takedowns also have been a bit more common and relatively more effective than the ones Ozdemir uses, which is interesting. Short segment again, but Vegas does like Krylov, and I'm going to go with the old-timer here and choose Ozdemir. This is mostly based on what I've seen, and I've seen Ozdemir fight more times than Krylov, and I've been impressed with Ozdemir more. And it looks like, while he's not as much of a kill-or-be-killed guy, he's willing to push it when he thinks he has it, and I think that could catch Krylov in a bad place. Of course, Krylov could always take down him into oblivion. I don't actually know. 25-7, Makhmud Makhmuradov wins best ring name for this fight and looks to get back on track against the surging 12-1 Caio the Natural Borralho. Muradov is 3 years older and either 1 or 3 inches taller because Sherdog and UFC can't get their shit together. Muradov is a striker through and through, 17 KO wins in his career and 2 in the UFC. He's also running with a 5.39 landed and 3.17 absorbed, which is really nice. Additionally, his UFC KOs came in the third round, which I find is a little rare for guys with that landed to absorb, but that could also just be more of a swarming style than a straight power style, which is perfectly understandable. He's also severely outstruck his opponents, helping me come to that conclusion in his 2 UFC wins. Borralho is basically the opposite, all but one of his UFC fights being decision wins with a high number of takedowns and varied number of strikes. His low striking total backs this up, 2.72 to 1.82, along with takedown average of 2.63. Now, looking at this fight, the favorite is Borralho, and I'm going to agree. I think Muradov has a skill set to win, and I'm not going to say he doesn't have a chance. His takedown defense is high, but Mearshart landed 3 and finished a fight in the second round. And I'm guessing the guy who has a takedown in every fight, Borralho, is going to be shooting a lot of takedowns. I'm not quite sure how many Muradov's going to be able to stop before Borralho gets his grinding going and just grinds him into oblivion. 21-3-0-1, Bilal Muhammad tries to make his case the challenge against the 15-0 Sean Brady. Muhammad is 5 years older, 1 inch taller, and dead even reach for these two fighters. Once again, Muhammad is a grinder. I could honestly end my segment there. You've heard me talk about grinders already. His striking is decent, 4.31 to 3.58, but that's mostly there so we can just hang in and set up his takedown, which run with a 2.29 average. On that note, there are only two UFC wins where he had 1 or fewer takedowns. So when it rains, it pours with Muhammad in terms of the takedowns. He technically could throw a submission, but that's not something he normally does. It's in his skill bag. I'm not sure if it's just not comfortable or if he's not willing to play that game with people. Now, Brady is similar in terms of fighting style and stats. He had a 3.91 absorbed, a 3.22 landed, and a takedown average of 3.22. He seems a bit more willing and active to pursue submissions, though I imagine it's both a mix of discipline and opportunity versus a game plan thing. This is another close one. Vegas likes I almost said O'Brady here. Vegas likes Brady. I'm going to disagree and go Muhammad. I like his experience, and I'm sort of expecting that to help him keep going. Both are on a hot streak, and this could go either way because with how good their skill sets look. I think Brady could get shots off and put them away and get on top and pursue them, or Muhammad could just dominate the top and grind to a finish. I don't know. But we are finally onto the main card, and thank God. Those fights aren't bad, but it's a lot of relatively new fighters trying to put together or trying to recover. And I don't mind it for watching, it's a fun storyline. But I'm trying to write this script, though. It is pulling teeth trying to find stats for some of these fighters. For Nishikawa, I had to try to put together a sentence or two about his background, and it's like, showing him, don't recognize any of these names. Why do you have 6 draws? Anyway, 18-4, Caitlin Blonde Fighter Chukagian contends for worst ring name, but doesn't win it, opens the main card up against the 9-1 Manon Labis Firo. Chukagian is a year older, 2 inches taller, with 3 inches of reach as well. Blondie here is yet another weird fight in this card. Striking is almost completely dead even, 4.56, 4.26, low takedown average of 0.28. And looking at her fight, she seems to alternate between just completely outstriking her opponent, 127-89, or keeping the striking close, 72-52, and securing one takedown for 3 minutes. She's a grinder in that regard, and she does it so well, pacing herself and keeping it fairly even through each round, never really overextending, never really falling behind, just being consistent every round. Firo is kind of the opposite as a finisher. She started off her UFC career with 2 KO wins for going back-to-back unanimous decision wins. In those, she took a heavy striking lead and backed it up with takedowns for decent ground control time. Now, Vegas here likes Firo, and I'm going to agree. It feels close on paper, but Firo's constant ground game likely will succeed enough to give her the points. I can see Chukagian, I keep saying her name, Chukagian, Blonde Fighter. I see Blonde Fighter possibly putting up a good fight here with how she's able to hang with striking, pouring it on like that. But this all comes down to the ground game, in my opinion. If Blonde Fighter can resist the takedown, keep it on the feet, or take down Firo and dominate the top, I think it goes her way. But if Firo gets on her high horse and runs over Blondie, I think we're at an issue here. 21, 4-1, Beneil Dariush looks to keep his streak running, and it's 21, 1-0-1, Jesus, Mateusz Gamer Gamrot. I hate that name. Dariush is 2 years older and takes 2 inches in reach. Dariush holds a place in my heart. It's mostly terror because I saw him dismantle Tony Ferguson live and went, that man is dead. Now, aside from that, Dariush has put together a really solid spread of stats. 3.80 landed, 2.5 absorbed, and a solid knockout power that they can call on if given the opportunity. It's not always available like a Derek Lewis, though it's a much heavier weight class. It's still an impressive thing in his repertoire. Does also have a 2.11 takedown average and possible submission game if he brings that out, given the opportunity. Gamrot, on the other hand, is a finisher in comparison. His overall game is relatively similar, though, in terms of stats and how he fights it. He does pursue finishes, but he's fine not getting them and just winning a fight. Striking is almost dead even, but again, that's expected. And his takedown game is monstrous with a 4.83 and this constant submission threat he has. Now, Gamrot is the favorite here. I'm going to disagree. Dariush impressed me when I saw him fight, and I feel like this is a fight that he'll be able to drag out. I don't discount Gamrot's skill, potential, or danger. I just think Dariush is good at surviving, and I think he'll drag this out to a decision win or a late round finish. But bringing up the last of our non-title fights, 16-3, Peter No Mercy Yan looks to get back to contention against 15-1, 0-1, Sugar Sean O'Malley. Yan is 2 years older, 4 inches shorter, and gives up 5 in reach. Now, Yan's a pretty well-rounded fighter, and I've talked about him a few times. He's got a pretty heavy focus on striking, 5.54 landed, 3.8 absorbed, and that sets him up pretty well. He's got a variety of strikes as well, playing into his overall game, giving him options and opportunity, also running with a 1.48 takedown average. But in his last 6 fights, we've only seen him get 4 minutes of ground control, and one of those was a DQ against Sterling. Now, in the spirits of fight ending abruptly, O'Malley is also coming off a no contest where he accidentally eye-poked Munoz. But to actually talk about the fighter, O'Malley's a striker. 7.75 landed, 3.48 absorbed, and knockout power seems to be available. In my opinion, it's more so a swarming amount of punches than a straight-up power. Effect's the same in the end. He's incredibly good at working his range and racking him strikes quickly and efficiently, and he's proven he can occasionally survive on the ground, unless your name is Chito Vera. This is absolutely hard to call. Vegas likes Yan, but I agree. But feels though O'Malley has a better shot than he's being given. He has that ability to land one shot that can rock, and Yan has proven that he can make poor decisions in fights before. I am picking Yan since overall I think that stat is better, and we've seen him go against it with Sterling and survive. And I think he can put that up against O'Malley, but I'm not going to count O'Malley out completely. First title fight of the night, 21-3. Aljamain from Pastor Sterling makes the state champ against 17-4 Captain EPO TJ Dillashaw. Sterling is 3 years younger, 1 inch taller, and does steal 4 in reach. Now, Sterling is coming off a solid performance over Yan. He racked up 8 minutes and 31 seconds of ground control off 2 takedowns and was able to keep it close with striking, at least significant strikes. He's proven a solid gas tank, able to go the distance and put pressure on people for the entire fight. I will say he's more grinder than finisher, but he works it well, so there's really no complaints from me there. Dillashaw is a long-term vet who hasn't fought since last year. In that fight, he pulled a split decision win over Sanhagen, where he kept the strikes close with a 110 to 128, but also secured 2 takedowns for 822 of ground control. Another close one according to Vegas. I'll agree and pick Sterling, however. I do think Dillashaw could be a rough matchup, but Sterling's proven he can make it 5 rounds against tough competition, and if the fight goes on, he can drag you into the deep end with his grappling and just sit on you and tire you out with enough to get the points. But now, the main event. 33, 8-0-1, Charles do Bronx Oliveira looks to take on 22-1 Islam Makhachev with a lightweight belt hanging on the line. Oliveira is 1 year older, same height, but does steal 4 inches in reach somehow. Now, Oliveira is, again, a pretty well-rounded fighter. That's the best way to describe his game. Now, it doesn't look great, I will say, 3.53 to 3.18 striking, but it's the ability he has to drop you with a well-placed shot when you're looking out for his ground game to smother you. That's his 2.46 takedown average and 21 career submission wins. He also can fight from his back and doesn't always need the takedown to get going with the ground game. Makhachev is honestly very similar as well of that rounded game. Striking is obviously his highlight with a stupidly good 2.27 to 0.84, which really highlights his power and, ironically, the power of his ground game, where he'll just straight up submit you or smother you into oblivion. So this is an awesome fight in my opinion. You have 2 fighters who are very similar in styles with one glaring difference, the striking, but the point of Oliveira's striking is that you don't think about it until he hits you with it, and he just terrifies you with a takedown game versus someone else who has great striking and a terrifying takedown game. Now, the most terrifying and impossible call of them all in this fight. Vegas likes Makhachev, but I'm going to disagree and pick Oliveira. These fighters are so closely matched on paper, and they have such rounded games that it's really a matter of preference in my opinion. I think Islam could win this 100%. But I'm leaning Oliveira, having seen him in his defenses and how he's adjusted and won in ways we didn't expect. I feel like the issue is with Oliveira is that because his game is built as it is, you have to walk in and be ready for everything. And the moment you're not, there you go. I'm not saying that's not the same with Makhachev, but I don't think Makhachev's fought anyone like Oliveira where one mistake can cost you the fight. I think he's fought great opponents, but Oliveira is different than who he's fought, if that makes any sense. But in the end, these are my opinions, predictions, and probably wrong ones at that. I do think UFC 280 is a really interesting card. I have slight issues with some of the fights on here. Why are you signing a 19-year-old to fight a 33-year-old? But besides that, I think this has a lot of potential in terms of future rankings. A lot of people winning on the main fight likely will challenge in the next few years. And I think a lot of people on the early prelims, depending on who wins, you'll likely see a lot of those names start to become a bit more prevalent in UFC. Kyle Borrahalo looks to be pretty good. I saw his name a few times beating a few other fighters on the prelim. I think a win here, you probably start seeing him in a conversation for a big jump-up fight, maybe fighting the 13th ranked fighter or going from there or fighting someone looking to get ranked as well. Overall, this is a fun fight. I like this card in the extent. I'll definitely watch it all the way through. That being said, if you are watching and willing, comment below who you think is going to win each fight. Comment below Oliveira Makhachev, or comment below how much you hate me with hopefully constructive criticism. But thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. See you fight night.